This is the Audience Connection podcast presented by Casual, the video partner for global brands. 9 offices, 4 continents, creating impactful stories on a global scale with a local touch. I'm your host, Lydia Chan. My guest today is Stephanie Paterik, an award-winning journalist with over 20 years of experience in media and newsrooms. She is currently the editor-in-chief at The Trade Desk and former editor-in-chief at Adweek. In this conversation, we dig into why having an editorial mindset is one of the most underrated skills in content development, and how adopting it can transform your content into something people actually crave and seek out. Stephanie explains what it means to create content that feels necessary, and how it starts with showing up like a reporter, being curious, being consistent, and being in the conversation, which is how The Current, a news platform born inside the Trade Desk, grew organic traffic by more than 80% year on year in 2024, with an engagement rate of 50%. And why their newsletter has over 150,000 loyal subscribers, of which 83% are director level or above, and 21% are C-suite. I mean, if we're talking about KPIs, this is it. So by blending that insider brand expertise with journalistic integrity and audience-first storytelling, Stephanie and her team were able to build a high-level, highly engaged audience. If you're thinking about the business case of building an editorial function inside a brand, you're going to love this one. Let's dive in. Okay, Stephanie, welcome to the show. I'm really excited for our conversation. You have such a deep and rich editorial background, from being an award-winning journalist to leading, editorial and content strategy. I really want to explore how that editorial mindset and approach really impacts audience engagement. So let's start with a brief intro for our audience.
Lydia, thank you so much for having me here. I love just the concept of your show and the chance to dig into the nitty-gritty of content. My background, I currently am editor-in-chief of The Trade Desk, which is an advertising technology platform. It's a demand-side platform that helps buyers and advertisers buy media and find the best places to buy media at a time where there have never been more options. And I oversee all of our content teams. So we have The Current, which is our news team full of journalists. We have the Edge Academy, which is creating on-demand education in advertising and technology. We have the Resource Desk, which is more traditional product and content marketing, and case studies and research. So it's this rich kind of content universe. My background is as a journalist. I spent 20 years working as a newspaper and magazine journalist. I started as a local reporter covering the overnight cops beat and City Hall, and worked my way to magazines, spent several years as editor at Adweek, and really just love the intersection of business and creativity. I find I'm often one of the more business-minded people in a room full of journalists and one of the more creative-minded people in a room full of executives. So it's like being a bridge who can speak, both languages and connect both sides of the house.
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's talk a little bit more about that, right? Like, why is that so important to have kind of that editorial mindset in building a team of journalists, right, within a business environment?
It's important for so many reasons, but the biggest is that journalists have, I think, 2 really valuable skills. I have a lot, but 2 I want to talk about. And one is a nose for a good story, like really being able to spot what is something, just what's a great story, what is going to be interesting to someone, what is going to hold someone's attention. And that's not necessarily everything that moves within a brand, right? And so I think that they're able to see everything going on in a brand, everything going on in a company, and really filter out what are those most interesting moments that people are going to connect to. And I think all the research shows, Gen Z, younger generations don't want to feel like they are being sold to or advertised to directly. They want to be entertained. They want something adding value to their life. So that skill becomes really important, not just for media companies, but for all companies. And related to that, when I was a newspaper reporter, I always saw myself as a stand-in for the reader. So like not all the million people who live in your city can go behind the police tape and interview the cops, or can interview, the famous author who's traveling to town, or who have time to go to the city hall meeting. And so as a reporter, you're really that stand-in. And I think that when, the trade desk, for example, hires a group of journalists, we really become reader advocates and advocate for people in the industry, and really helping the company connect with what people need to hear and what they're interested in knowing right now.
Yeah, I really love that. This kind of idea of peeking behind the curtains, right? Especially in organizational setting. I think for me, I think about the different types of content that we've created for our clients, and there's this bucket of say like thought leadership type content, right? But it always kind of feels like talking at your audience. But I think when you take this sort of like you mentioned behind the red tape approach, right? It feels like a insider kind of look. And I think for the audience, that makes it feel so real, right? It makes it feel really genuine, and that they're actually getting that insider glimpse into something that is very valuable.
Right. It's that inside, the appeal of the inside scoop,
Yeah.
is one thing. And I love what you said too, this idea of talking at the audience versus talking with the audience. And I think that that's something really important to notice, is the distinction between an editorial mindset and a campaign mindset. Like a traditional campaign is a one-way communication. It's like, I have a billboard and I'm putting it up and you're going to see it. And, there's no invitation to have a conversation. Whereas, an editorial mindset, which again, anyone can adopt, whether you're, a classic newsroom or not, is really all about stoking community and stoking a conversation and creating something that feels like the town hall, for your particular readership and community.
Yeah, I really like that. I think, with all the guests that I've had on the podcast, there's this theme emerging of actually creating content that the audience actually values, right? So this idea of serving versus selling.
I love that. That's such a perfect way to put it. And we think about that too. Service journalism is a term that's really meaningful to me, and it can play out in a lot of different ways. But really, it comes down to, we see ourselves as serving our audience and really tapping into what are they struggling with right now? Like, what are their biggest challenges? What is keeping them up at night? What is changing faster than they can wrap their arms around? And how do we really help them navigate that change? And so, working in advertising and tech and media, those are all industries going through rapid transformation. And working inside a tech company has been a really amazing experience for me as a journalist, because it is like being behind the curtain and seeing, seeing the speed of innovation and the speed of change, and then figuring out how to, help the industry as a whole navigate that curve.
Yeah. You talked about also the most popular type of content on your site is the opinion pieces, right? And how that creates a space for conversation, for peer-to-peer discussion. And I think that is such an important metric, if you will, right? Are there discussions outside of the content? Because creating content that maybe goes nowhere or doesn't spur critical thinking, I think is a lost opportunity, right? So why is it so important to create content that fosters dialogue, that builds community?
Yeah. Thecurrent.com, which is our news site that covers the advertising industry, and particularly the digital advertising industry, had a really ambitious goal in 2024, which was to publish 100 op-eds. And we didn't have much of an op-ed program in place. We had run a few, they had done well. So we challenged ourselves to really create a really robust network, and recruited a lot of executives from around the industry. And like you said, it turned out to be some of our most popular content. Our two most popular stories of the year were op-eds, and one of them was written by the Trade Desk founder and CEO. So we found that there's an appetite for hearing both from our internal execs as well as executives around the industry. There are two themes. There are common denominators in the op-eds that get the most traction. And one is that they're talking about something really timely. And so rather than like evergreen op-eds that are going to be interesting, 2-5 years from now, it's like, what are people talking about right now in this moment? And what is your take on that? The second is truly having an opinion. And there are so many op-eds or so much thought leadership is really more about like education or how to or explaining something. And so when we work, when we work with executives who are trying to find what they want to write about, I love to prompt people by saying like, what's your most unpopular opinion?
Yeah.
What are you ready to like throw down about? And what's an opinion you have that someone could disagree with? And that's the thing to write about, not, 3 ways to XYZ.
Yeah. I really like that. I think that's very common, right? The almost like regurgitation of facts or what you hear on podcasts or read on a certain publication. But there's no, again, is that dialogue and that opinion and just have some sort of human emotion towards whatever it is that you're reading, right? I think that's what people are really trying to seek out, right? They're trying to seek out how this piece of content or how this fact or article is making you feel and what actions it's provoking, perhaps.
Yes. And I think people want to get outside of their bubbles. I think everyone is aware, to an extent that, we're each sort of in a bubble or an echo chamber, and each industry in itself can serve as that. And so by creating content that allows peers to learn from each other, like it's a way for them to say like, okay, there's this big global thing happening. How is that playing out in your bubble? What can I learn about that and bring into my world too?
Yeah, I really like that. And maybe a small segue to talking about your bullseye approach to identifying your key audience segment. Expand a little bit more about that. How does that impact the way you approach storytelling and the type of content being created when you kind of use this bullseye approach to, hey, who's the key target? And then the sort of aspirational audience, and then the almost like outliers, right? Sort of this ripple effect of reaching this outer audience, but not necessarily focusing your content on them.
Yes, I'm happy to share a little bit more about that. I mean, I'll start with, I think, a very common mistake that publications and even brands can make is to try to be everything to everybody. So with that strategy, the bullseye would be the entire board.
Yeah.
And it's like, we're trying to get everyone, and everyone is equal priority. And so I think it's really important when you're building your audience strategy to create those bullseye rings and decide who is really at the core. Who is that core reader who is most valuable to me and who I am most valuable to? Who needs my content in order to do their job better, to be successful? And really keying in and making sure that no matter how your content strategy changes, you are serving that core reader. And then, choosing a couple of audiences in the outer bands that you can start to reach out to as you grow and expand. So for the current, for instance, our core reader is the ad tech insider. It's someone who understands programmatic advertising. They might work for a publisher. They might work for a brand. They might, work for a tech company, but they really know it and they want the inside scoop. They want that peek behind the curtain. Also becoming, really important to us is the brand marketer. We're finding that the decision point for media spend is really rising within organizations, up to the C-suite. And so you have these very seasoned brand executives who may not be as comfortable with programmatic advertising. They might not understand the tech as much, and they need to now. Our second band is really, talking to that high level brand marketer and executive. And, brands can continue to expand from there. But I think like never forgetting your bullseye, never forgetting your target is super important.
Yeah, for sure. And that happens a lot, right? Where you're trying to reach everyone and then end up reaching no one because your content is not focused.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. You're kind of, yeah, you're doing it halfway. You're serving everyone a little. And with so much content out there, my team and I talk a lot about how do we be necessary? You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
we want to create content that feels necessary. And if it serves everyone a little bit, like it's going to be the thing, it's going to be the email they can like cut out of their inbox. It's going
Yeah.
to be the thing that they can do without. So who do you want to be necessary to?
Mm. So talk a little bit more about that, right? Like how do you figure out how to be necessary?
Well, a big one is really talking to people. And I mentioned that two-way communication, right? Never assuming I have it all figured out and I know what is on my reader's mind. I think actually getting out and talking to people. Again, going back to my reporter days, as a cops reporter, we had something called beat checks, right?
Yeah.
And so I would, 10 o'clock at night, I would call all the 911 operators in town and be like, what's cooking? What's going on? And some nights, it would be like a snake in a toilet, and some nights, there would be like a murder down the block. But you didn't know unless you called every day. And I think, we've gotten away from conversations. And I think some of it is, just the digital way that we connect. I think some of it is the pandemic. But as an editorial team, we have really prioritized getting out on the front lines, on the ground, attending industry conferences, going to events, calling people up, not just when we're working on a story, but just calling up to be like, hey, what's new? What's going on? And so just listening is a huge part of understanding what is on your reader's mind,
Yeah.
and from there kind of understanding what can be essential. And then also, having those conversations inside your own organization. Like I
Mm.
mentioned, working in a tech company, sometimes, we know about things coming up before everybody else does. We know sometimes what people might be interested in knowing before they even know it's there. And so I encourage my team to act as reporters within our own organization and call up
Yeah.
our executives, have like those regular touch bases and hear what's on our own colleagues' minds and what they're hearing from clients, and all of that like is just great fodder for telling essential stories.
Yeah, totally agree. One of our recent guests, Eternal Polk, he's an award-winning director, and one of the things that he's really keen on is basically keeping an ear to the streets, right? Like you kind of need to be not an observer of culture, but be a part of it, and that takes time. It takes investment of that time, and again, really experiencing that in real life, right? Having those conversations with the audiences that you're perhaps trying to connect with. And like you said, just doing more kind of this on the ground reporting. And I think, yeah, a lot of folks can kind of adopt that mindset when they're looking at, hey, how do I really, again, create a piece of content that's connecting with the people I'm trying to connect with?
Something that comes to mind too, I mean, I really am rediscovering the value of in-person connection, being literally
Absolutely.
on the ground, but also, just really mapping out for your organization, like, where are the vital conversations happening?
Mm.
For us, LinkedIn is another huge spot. It's a virtual gathering space. We've gotten some op-ed ideas that started by us seeing a really interesting post and reaching out to someone and saying, hey, would you like to develop that, into a 700-word story? Because I think you've got an interesting opinion there. So I don't want to discount digital spaces because that's really valuable too.
Hmm.
And it's about knowing where is your particular audience congregating and having those conversations, and then making sure you're putting yourself in the center of that.
Yeah. So say you're a brand who wants to build this kind of editorial team, right? Who wants to build this organic audience. What's your, I guess, tips on how do you even start? Like where do you start? And also get buy-in from leadership, right? To say like, this is a content ecosystem, right? Of course, we're going to have our traditional marketing. We're going to have stuff for social media. We're going to have editorial content. It's all a 360 ecosystem, right? That feeds into some kind of value add or ROI metric that we're striving for.
Yeah, that's such a great question. How do you actually do it? You called it out. I think having an executive in the organization who really understands the power and the value of editorial storytelling helps tremendously. I give credit to the trade desk's chief marketing officer, Ian Cawley, who he has spent a large part of his career in PR, so working with journalists. And I think really understood, the power of serving versus selling. And he, had this vision for a corporate journalism, team, and recruited journalists from the BBC and from Business Insider. And so having that support and that understanding has been huge. I would say, in terms of recruiting and sort of growing that team is there are so many journalists out there. There are a lot of journalists, and those skills are highly transferable. These are people who are intelligent, inquisitive, they know how to research, they know how to communicate. And so don't be shy about reaching out to someone who's working for a traditional journalism organization. And pitching them on this. Like, you'd be surprised just what a big talent pool there is tapping into. Many journalists have spent their careers sort of like feeling like they're in a spectator sport, right? They're writing about the brands that everyone else is building. And so for me, it's a really compelling opportunity, to work as a journalist, but also to be helping build a brand and learning so much on the business side. So I think it's a really compelling kind of opportunity for folks. I think something to know too is like setting it up for success. A newsroom functions differently than a marketing organization. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned the difference between like a campaign mindset and an editorial mindset. And a campaign mindset is like every last word, every visual, everything is perfect. Everything has gone through like 10 rounds of reviews. There are long lead times on campaigns a lot. And journalism, it's quick, it's scrappy, it's in the moment. We're just on The Current alone, we're publishing about 20 stories a week. And so setting up that team a little bit apart, it can sit within your marketing organization, but giving them autonomy, both for, editorial selection and letting them really choose what is and isn't a story. And two is setting them up for maybe a different kind of operations or a different kind of timeline that lets them move the way they need to move.
Yeah. And to the audience too, like they know or would expect the content to be more raw, right? Like they expect it to not have so much editing or, going through rounds of reviews and control, if you will, too, right? And I think that's how one would build that audience trust.
Yeah, well, and even, it's a really common practice for when there's breaking news for newsrooms to put up a 1-paragraph story to start, or a 3-paragraph story that they add to throughout the day. So that's another thing too, right? It's iterative. That might feel a little rough. You're not waiting until you have the fully polished piece. If the news is important enough, you want to get it out fast and you can refine as you go. That said, I will say we have an incredible art team who creates these like bespoke illustrations, and they do it really fast. Yeah. And I feel like it is also a benefit, as a journalist to be working inside a marketing organization with like a world-class creative team. I feel like they are really able to elevate the work, and it's just another way to stand out.
Awesome. Well, Stephanie, thank you so much for this conversation and all the expertise that you bring to the table. Any final thoughts and key takeaways or advice for brands, again, when they're thinking about investing in corporate journalism and really building a strong following?
Yes, Lydia, I think two things I would end with. One is just reiterating how important it is to listen as much as you speak and really think about your audience. or your clients in terms of a two-way communication. And the second would be just recognizing that creativity and business don't have to be at odds. They really can go hand in hand, and look for ways to bridge those within your organization, and you'll be ahead of the game.
Awesome. Perfect. Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show.
Lydia, thanks for having me. This was so much fun.
Thanks for tuning in to the Audience Connection podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, don't forget to subscribe and leave us a review. If you'd like to connect with me about how I can help you tell better stories and connect better with your audiences, drop me a note, lydia@casualfilms.com. We'll be back with more episodes soon. See you next time.